Hello there once again, good people of the world. It's the Big Heavy, and I'm back once more with the Ecoflow Delta 2, which is the new battery bank slash solar generator from Ecoflow. I have a pretty extensive beast mode review that I'll link to up in the corner if you want to get all the details, see this thing from every angle, and get my feelings on how this unit compares to a couple other options. And overall, pretty impressed. It's a great size, nice and portable. Like the way it's put together, like the features, the plugs, all that stuff. But one of the headline features of this new unit is its charge time. It promises a 50-minute charge from 0% battery up to 80%, and then around 80 minutes to get from 0 to a full battery. I've run this unit all the way down to 0%. One interesting thing about that is it said it had between 4 and 6 minutes remaining. I plugged every device I could scare up in my studio into this to kind of run the battery all the way down. Even made myself an Nespresso with the Nespresso machine, and it was able to power that fine. I think I saw it pulling up to 1700 watts. The unit had no problem with that. But what was interesting was those indicated last 4 to 6 minutes took about 25 minutes in reality to actually burn through the battery. So two things you could say about that. Number one, that's great. The unit gives you a lot of warning that it's going to run out. It said I have 4 minutes left and actually had about 25 minutes left. That's the positive way to look at it. The negative way to look at it is the battery meter may or may not be all that accurate in its both estimating and its percentage remaining. It sat at 1% for quite a while before it actually ran out, which is not unusual. Lithium-ion batteries, I'm not sure of the science behind it, but the battery meters aren't always the most accurate things in the world. Another thing to note real quickly, a lot of people asked about the fan noise on this unit. I'm sure we're going to hear it, and I'll give you some impressions once I plug it in to start charging, because it's going to be running some sort of internal circuitry to convert the wall power into battery power. So I'd imagine the fans will spin up. You won't be able to hear that very well on video. I don't have an SPL meter. I don't have an acoustic room. I don't have all the stuff you need to actually get a true scientific reading on how noisy this thing is. So I'm going to give you some subjective impressions. From plugging in the coffee maker, the fans spun up and got pretty loud. What was interesting compared to some of the other battery banks I have was two things. First of all, it wasn't unseemingly loud. It was about the same as some of the other banks will do when they're getting a big draw of 1500 to 1600 watts, so nothing too unusual there. But it did seem to do a really good job of spinning the fans up and adjusting them based on the power draw. It also seemed to smooth that out a little bit, and what I mean is when the power went all the way up to 1600 watts, the fans went up to full power, and they stayed there for a relatively short amount of time. As soon as the power demand went down, the fans kind of ramped down, and they seemed to stay there. The fans weren't varying up and down all over the place. They kind of seemed to take their time to step up and down and did it in a pretty pleasant manner. I don't know if that was intentional. I would assume that somebody put some thought and put some programming into this guy to make sure it wasn't letting the fans run wild and vary quite a bit, because that would be annoying. That did seem like it was thoughtful, but could be coincidental. The other thing I'll say about the fans, when I had all my devices on this table plugged in, it was pulling about 170 watts according to the meter on here, and the fans were on, but they stayed at a constant pace. It was a pretty pleasant fan noise. It was kind of a background hum like a bedroom fan or like an air conditioner fan or something like that. It was nice that it stayed constant. It didn't vary. They weren't going on and off or up and down. So far I would say the fans were pretty nice. I'm interested to see what happens when we plug this guy in and see if the fans go crazy. So without further ado, this guy is down at 0%. I'm not sure if he'll even let me power on. It looks like he will, so you can see on here 1 minute remaining, 0% battery. I've got the little Insta camera on here, so I'm going to turn this guy, turn on this camera. I'll speed this up, obviously. I'm not going to make you sit through 80 minutes of watching a battery meter go up. And I'll put a little clock on the screen so you can see how this guy does from a time perspective, but let's plug this in and see what happens. All right, so recording's all set. I've got the magic plug. One thing I will note, this cord seems to be just about 6 feet. It's not the longest cord in the world. It is heavy gauge. I assume that they made it short so you wouldn't have a lot of power loss, or just because it's a thick cord and they wanted to cut a few pennies. So let's plug this in and see what happens. So a couple relays clicking and clacking in the back, and now we're starting to get some input, obviously. You may or may not be able to hear the fans. They seem to be on the same level as this unit was when I was pulling out 1600 watts to make my espresso. So this seems to be full blast. I would say this level of fan noise is, again, not unusual for a power bank that's kind of working at its hardest. It's not immensely annoying, but it is definitely noticeable. You know, if you had to sit right next to this thing, if you were working at your computer, it probably would fade into the background at some point, but it would definitely be noticeable and somewhat annoying. I think sitting on the other side of the room, which I'm going to go do now and sit at my desk and get some work done while this thing runs, not the end of the world, not terrible, but still definitely noticeable. So right now we're at 1%. We've got 530-ish watts pumping into this dude, and I'm going to leave him alone, and we'll see if we get that 50-minute claim to 80%. I'll slow down the video around there, and then we'll see how long it takes to get up to 100%. So we'll slow down from warp speed for a second time-wise. I don't know if you can hear that. Let me put my mic up next to here. So the first 5%, I think more or less, that this guy was charging, he was pulling in a little over 500 watts. I was actually kind of surprised and wondering how it was going to manage to hit that 50-minute charge time. But then right after 5%, the fans kicked in. I mean, they're in like, you know, full-on jet engine, ready for takeoff mode. Frankly, kind of annoying. I'm sitting 15 feet away at my desk over there, and the initial fans were not too bad. This is, you know, frankly a little annoying. It sounds like some sort of crazy machine, but it's pulling down just shy of 1200 watts, so now we have our answer on how it's going to actually make those committed 50-minute charge times. So we'll see what happens and take you back to warp speed. All right, so the fans just stopped. You can see we are at 100%. So I'll put those on the screen as a little summary too, so you can see the 80% charge time as well as the full 100% charge time. In terms of the fans going, I mentioned that the fans kicked in, and we're going into full howl mode. They continued doing that until about 83-ish% and then wound down to kind of a similar level as they were in the beginning. The power that was going into the unit, according to the app at least, went down to about 400 watts, went a little more towards 300 watts towards the end, and the last couple or 3% took quite a bit of time to get in the battery. But it seems like this lived up to the claim of a little over an hour for a full 0 to 100% charge. One thing I noticed that was a little funky in the app, it just sort of lost its way a little bit when I went from using the app and viewing the unit while it was powering some devices and then plugged it in and it started charging. It indicated that some of the outputs were still on. You might have seen me in the action cam video checking the back and making sure the inverter wasn't on. The app indicated the inverter was on. It showed it was charging, but also showed the battery was running down. I'll put a screenshot of that up. It was a little bit weird. I closed the app, opened it again, everything seemed fine. In terms of the fan noise, it was fairly annoying when it was going through that 1200 watt power up phase in the middle. But you can adjust the maximum charge rate in the app. So if you were, somewhere where maybe you got back from a camping trip or whatnot, or maybe you were done with a power outage and wanted to charge this up and maybe have an apartment or we're going to have the unit sitting next to you, you could limit the charge to 300-400 watts, let this guy charge overnight and not have to deal with the loud fan noise. So that's it for charging up the Ecoflow Delta 2. Again, pretty nice unit, and you can watch my full scale review to hear all the ins and outs and see every square inch of this sucker. Last video I've got in the works related to this unit is I'm going to take it out into the field, take it camping, and see how it does when it's out in its element. I'll also plug a few solar panels in here, see how that goes, since I've got a solar panel review from Ecoflow in the works as well. I'm also going to sprinkle in some camping and truck stuff if you're getting tired of the battery packs. So hit all the buttons, ring all the bells, do all the things, and continue to be well. Big Heavy, saying peace. Ever wonder why every talking head on YouTube asks you to hit the like and subscribe button at the end of their video? You were right, because we're living in a computer simulation. And our benevolent robotic overlords get just a little bit of energy every time you hit that like. So, do me, the rest of civilization, and our benevolent robotic overlords a favor. Mash that subscribe, be kind to each other, keep living your simulated dreams.